NFL regular season is finally done. So that means, just like the Golden Globes, we are handing out the awards for the 2023 season. Hopefully, our hosts will be a little bit better than theirs, but we have the Fantasy Football Awards for 2023. I am Cameron Lawrence, and I am joined by my friend, my pal, my guy, Mr. Tyler Plath. And we are ready to discuss who won the biggest awards this season. We're talking biggest bust, biggest steal, waiver wire pickup of the year, surprise of the year, rookie of the year, and of course, the coveted fantasy MVP. Before we dive on in, if you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, turn on those notifications. If you're on the podcast, Tyler, you're just laughing and throwing me off here, dude. I'm on a roll right now.
You just threw the most unnecessary shot at Joe Coy I've ever heard. That was amazing.
I was just ready for this. Usually on our intros, I have like 17 times to try this. This was first cut, first try. This is about the best I've ever had. And Ty ruins it by laughing. But who cares? If you're on the audio podcast, make sure you give us a follow. We're not going to waste any more time. Let's dive in to the Fantasy Football Awards for 2023. Alrighty, real quick, how this is going to work. We're going to read off our 4 finalists. We put out polls on our Instagram story yesterday. We are going to give you the people's choice for each of these. And then me and Ty will discuss a little bit if we agree with people, if we disagree with people. We're going to start out with everyone's favorite award, the biggest bust. And our 4 candidates are Dameon Pierce, Miles Sanders, Austin Ekeler, and Travis Kelce. Obviously, nobody wants to win this award. This is the award you hope you stay away. It's the first year in last 3 that we haven't had Allen Robinson on this list. So congratulations, A-Round.
Yeah.
Decreasing your role enough where you're not important enough to be on the list. But without further ado, our winner we don't have a drum roll. We need a drum roll. Our winner for the biggest bust is Mr. Austin Ekeler with 64% of the votes. Travis Kelce came in second with 20% of the votes. Dameon Pierce third with 9%, and Miles Sanders fourth with 8%. Tyler, I will ask you, what do you think of the people's choice here? Do you agree with Ekeler? Do you agree with their order on this? What do you think?
I get why people said Austin Ekeler, because you spent a top 5 pick on the guy. Yep. You took him to be the guy, to be the highest scorer on your team. And he certainly did not live up to that. He finished as a running back 26 on the year, only averaging 13 fantasy points a game, which is more than some of the guys that he's finished around, right? You look at Chuba Hubbard, you look at Javonte Williams, right? Those guys are averaging like 10, 11. But the fact that Austin Ekeler, he had his injury spell where he missed 4 games. We did not see the Austin Ekeler of old. And that let a lot of people down this year, because that's what you were expecting from Austin Ekeler.
Yeah, I would agree. It's just we look at his stats on the season. He was the running back 20, I think I want to say 25 in points per game, running back 26 on the season. He had 179 carries, only 628 yards, and only 3.5 yards per carry, which, just is not something we've seen from him. He only had 5 touchdowns this year, which obviously is way down. Only had 50 receptions, only 74 targets. And then he only added another 1 touchdown through the year. That's just very uncharacteristic from a guy that we've seen 20 plus touchdowns 2 years in a row from. So obviously you were hurting big time if you took Austin Ekeler. The other guy that surprised me on this list is Travis Kelce. And so for me personally, I don't know if I would have had Travis Kelce in my top 4. I'm shocked he was 20% of the vote. I understand that he was tight end 1, another, top 6 pick. the dude was still tight end 1 in points per game. Like, okay, I get it. You're because you're expecting 18 and he gives you 14.6.
Yep.
We look at the first half of his season, it was phenomenal, right? He was a tight end 1. He's averaging 20 fantasy points per game. But a lot like Stephon Diggs over the last half of the year just killed you. I mean, and I guess it's different from the tight end position because it doesn't necessarily kill you, but when you're counting on those points, it hurts. For us, I know our bust of the year was between Dameon Pierce and Miles Sanders, between us 3 fellas. Those were the 2 guys that it came back to. I know I said Miles Sanders just because he gave you 3 games and that was it. And then you couldn't even have him on your roster, really. Ty, I don't know who would have been your pick for biggest bust this year.
So real quick, I just want to say this about Kelsey. I mean, I get the Kelsey part too, because I think the only argument that's really there for Kelsey is the fact that you took him in the first round for positional advantage. You never got a positional advantage. So that's understandable. But the fact that he's still giving you 15 points from the tight end spot is still like, let's not go too crazy on that one. Now, to Dameon Pierce and Miles Sanders, this is where I have to separate like the bias that I'll call of being right, because all 3 of us were not in on Dameon Pierce at all this year. I was very in on Devin Singletary because I was like, he can overtake Dameon Pierce in this offense, and sure enough, what happened by the end of the season's end. But we were in on Miles Sanders quite a bit because we're like, there's no one else, and not only he gave you 1 game with more than 15 points, 1 game besides the 17-point week he had, 1 game in double digits. Everything else was in single digits. And that was our sneaky candidate for the kind of mid-round running back that has, the super great role and what could be, the big role that he's going to get. And he never came through on it. So personally, like, as much as I want to say Dameon Pierce because it makes us sound better, I'm going to be a little introspective and say Miles Sanders is probably my biggest bust of the year, because again, the guy only gave you 2 double-digit fantasy point finishes. Like, it was a disastrous year for Miles Sanders.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's really where I'm at is Miles Sanders. I've been so out on him, and I finally decided to get in. And it was, you look last year, 1,200 yards in 2022, over 5 yards per carry. Chuba Hubbard got beat up by Deonta Foreman this last, in 2022. Couldn't even get the starting role then. They're talking about in the offseason, we want to get this guy 55 to 60 catches this season. And so you're like, okay, he's efficient. He's going to get the work, and he's going to be involved in the passing game. What more don't you like? And he played those 3 games, got hurt, and just never saw the field again. And to Chuba Hubbard's credit, he played well. Like, with what was given, obviously, they weren't a great team. So you weren't expecting him to average 5 yards per carry because they were just stacking the box against Bryce Young. But it was just, we followed it on Miles Sanders, but there's a reason he's in the running back dead zone, right? It's because there are these question marks about, is Miles Sanders actually that guy that can command this? And he just was not. And we followed the money. We did all that, but he just flat out was a disappointment.
Yeah. I mean, Lucas and I touched on this in our biggest takeaways when I was talking about the wide receiver 20s from this past year. They were all disappointments except for one, and that was Brandon Ayuk, right? And the common thread between all the other players was that because they were on really bad offenses, or they were aging, or injuries, or of the sort, right? The dead zone is quite literally the riskiest part of your draft. You have to take a bet on somebody, and you just have to hope that you're right. Because if because again, you could have taken Dameon Pierce and you paid for it.
Yeah.
Or we avoided, so that looks like a win for us. But then we put our, we had sure bets, right? We put it on Miles Sanders, and that didn't work out for us either. So it's the toughest part of your draft for a reason. And if you nailed your picks in that area, you probably won your league.
Yeah, and that's another hard thing about Dameon Pierce is the offense was great this year. The offense was on fire. They were moving the ball all over the field, and he just could not. Obviously injuries play a little bit of a factor. The fact that Devin Singletary comes in and plays awesome, but that's part of football. Alrighty, enough doom and gloom. Let's move on to the biggest steal of the season. Our 4 finalists for this one: Raheem Mostert, Mike Evans, Alvin Kamara, and Rachaad White. And drum roll, please. Our winner of the biggest steal on the fan vote is Raheem Mostert with 61% of the votes. Rachaad White at 17% of the votes. Mike Evans at 14%, and Alvin Kamara at 7%. I mean, this one makes a lot of sense. It's just right. Rachaad White, Mike Evans, Alvin Kamara all had great seasons, but it's the fact that Raheem Mostert was taken 5 to 6, 7 rounds behind these guys. I mean, the 11th to the 13th round, depending on where you look, it's just the value is insane. And I think as we got closer to the season, I think you were the same way, especially in best ball drafts. I was starting to take a lot more Raheem Mostert just because it was, hey, he's going to be the number one guy probably with Devon A-Chain, but you weren't expecting this. Even like I in no way was expecting this from him.
No, I'm conveniently coming out with another top 7 steals video, diving in deep on the 7 biggest steals. Every single guy that was, nominated for this biggest steal award is in this video. And it's because they're going at such a later price, I'll call it later round. And they all delivered either top 5 or top 10, fantasy points for you. Again, and most of these guys, I shouldn't say most of these guys, because Mostert was like 11th round. He was the beginning of the 11th round. But Alvin Kamara, Rachaad White, and even Mike Evans, dead zone guys again, right? If you can nail these dead zone guys, Alvin Kamara, running back 3 in fantasy points per game. Rachaad White, running back 9 in fantasy points per game. Mike Evans, wide receiver 9 in fantasy points per game. If you nailed these picks, you won your league. And honestly, as much as we want to make a big deal about building the most, the best roster possible from top to bottom, you can get a head start on that if you can find the biggest steal of the year. And if you got Raheem Mostert, you pretty much set yourself up for success.
Yeah, that's what it came down to is, I'm going to read his stat line real quick. He averaged 17.8 fantasy points per game. And you can say, oh, you had that 50-point week. Okay, he's still, he was still phenomenal every other week. 209 carries, 1,000 yards, 4.8 yards per attempt. He had 21 touchdowns, this season, which is just wild. Had another 25 catches for 175 yards on the ground or through the air. And obviously, his season probably looks a lot different if A-Chain stays healthy. Stays healthy. But that's what fantasy football is, right? Raheem Mostert every year of his career hasn't stayed healthy, but he turns 31 and all of a sudden he's averaging 5 yards per carry, staying healthy. It's just something that's just mind blowing to me that he was able to stay healthy through this entire season. That he was able to keep that up.
Yeah.
If we look at,
go ahead.
Oh no, you go ahead real quick.
I was going to say there were 2 players that were very, very close from being nominated in this award too. Nico Collins, end of the 14th round.
Yes,
wide receiver 8 in fantasy points per game. Very, very close. The other one, Sam Laporta, right? Tight end 1 on the year, tight end 3 in fantasy points per game, middle of the 14th round. Yeah. I have to think that the only reason why we left out Nico Collins and Sam Laporta, I can't necessarily say it's because they got lucky at their price point that they did so well. But I think there was probably some expectation on our end that we saw a way for these guys to be good. So yes. I think if you're sitting there and you're like, well, how come Nico Collins and Sam Laporta aren't there? Completely get that. Get that. But I think I at least that's what when I look at some of the biggest steals, that's probably why Nico Collins, Sam Laporta are left off.
Yeah, Nico Collins is the one that I think we could have argued to really be on. Sam Laporta we left off due to he's going to be in this next category of the waiver wire pickup. He was on waivers in more than 50% of leagues at the beginning of the season. So if you tell me, hey, I drafted him, well, okay, but it was 50. We're going off 50% of leagues was why he is the waiver wire pickup. You look at guys like Evans and Kamara. for us, I think a lot of people think, oh, this is just what they do. But for where they were drafted, like people were doubting them. Like, Kamara had the, suspension. Evans, it was like, oh, now we got Baker. We don't have Tom Brady anymore. He's getting older. We got the contract stuff. And they came out and were awesome. And Rashad White was another guy, like, is he going to be able to take over the line? I mean, people were talking about Sean Tucker at the beginning of the season taking over this role. And Rashad White was like, nope, this is mine. He said it before the season started because they're like, ooh, maybe they'll draft Bijan. He's like, bring in whoever you want. I'm the starting guy. And he backed it up this year. He really did. But yeah, I agree. I think Nico Collins really could be the one that would be in here. It'd be interesting to see what voting looks like. I think Mostert still wins. Yeah. But I do think Nico kind of would close that gap a little bit more. But I teased it, so let's move on to it. We have our waiver wire pickup of the year, and I think this is where we're going to talk probably the most about all these players because we got some exciting guys on this list. This is Kyren Williams, Puka Nacua, Jordan Love, and Nico Collins. Can we get a drum roll, please? Oh, that was terrible. Our winner for our waiver wire pickup is Mr. Kyren Williams at 48%. Puka is right behind him at 37%. Devon Achane at 8%, and Sam Laporta at 7%. Any surprise with this order right here, Ty?
No, I think the one surprise is just how low Sam Laporta was compared to all the other ones. 48% of the vote went to Kyren, 37% of the vote went to Puka, 8% went to Devon Achane, and 7% went to Sam Laporta. I thought Laporta was going to get a little bit more love, but maybe that's where maybe we were off, is that maybe Sam Laporta was drafted more than we expected, right? Or, we were going off of data, so we were just looking at numbers, but I wonder, it feels like Laporta probably is that kind of awkward in between of like, maybe some people thought he was drafted a ton. Some people thought he wasn't drafted enough.
Yeah. And I think it's hard to argue with the top two guys on this list, right? Kyren Williams and Puka. And you look at Kyren Williams, 228 rush attempts, 1,144 yards, 5 yards per carry. I had 12 touchdowns on the ground, another 32 receptions, 206 yards and 3 touchdowns. All in 12 games, he averaged 21.3 fantasy points per game, which is crazy because Alvin Kamara, who we just talked about, was third in running back points per game, and he had 17.9. Kyren Williams had 3.4 fantasy points a game more than the running back two. And what's even crazier is Christian McCaffrey had another 3.2 fantasy points per game more than Kyren Williams. It's just shows you where Christian McCaffrey is. But for Kyren, the fact that he solidified in 2022, he would have been running back one. He would have been 0.6 points behind Austin Eckler for running back one in points per game in 2022. He would have won it in 2021, which is pretty wild to think about. You talk about coming out of the middle of nowhere. He wasn't even supposed to start. He wasn't even supposed to get meaningful carries truly behind Cam Akers. And it took him like 35 seconds to take over Cam Akers' spot.
No, literally. And in the, Kyren rarely cost you a week. It was only twice that he scored less than double digits. He had his IR spell. Yeah. But the fact that he was on waivers, you probably had your regular guys still around. So when he went on IR, you were probably fine anyway. Yeah. And then when he comes back, first game back, no big deal. Just throws up a 38 burger, right? And then he goes 20-14, 24-16, and then finishes the year with 30, right? He more than likely only cost you maybe 1 week. And that, to get that off of waivers, right? To not have to go through the stress of finding that guy in the draft, kudos to you.
Yeah, it was crazy. And I want to let you talk about his teammate Puka a little bit because I know you were a big Puka guy. I'm going to read his stat line off really quick because these are rookie records. So 105 receptions, rookie record, 160 targets. That one might be a rookie record. I'm not 100% on that. 1,486 yards. There's another rookie record. He had 14.2 yards per reception. He had only 6 touchdowns, which is pretty crazy. Another 12 carries, 89 yards, averaged 17.6 fantasy points per game. Was the wide receiver 4 on the season. Ty, tell us a little bit about this guy. And you know what? Let's give the people what they want. What is your outlook moving forward for Puka Nacua too?
See, this is where it gets interesting, because I really hope, look, we do have to be kind of brutally honest about Puka a little bit. The guy, once Cooper Kupp came back, week 5, and then was fully healthy in week 6, here's his reception numbers per game: 4, 8, 3, 3, 5, 4, 4, 5, 5, 9, 5, 4. There's not really a whole lot there to get super excited about with Cooper Kupp back in the offense. And, he did have his games, right? 8 for 12 and 154, 9 for 11 and 164, and then he would sprinkle in a score here and there. I think a lot of people are going to place wide receiver 1 expectations on Puka next year, and maybe he can, right? Maybe sophomore year, he can take another step forward, another year in McVay's offense. I think we need to cautiously approach Puka next year, right? If Cooper Kupp is fully healthy, Matt Stafford is back, right? Like, I want us to be a little cautious that we're not putting, again, the wide receiver, he finished as the wide receiver 4 on the year, if I'm not mistaken. I want to be careful that we're not putting that expectation on him next year, because I think there is at least a reality where he doesn't return that kind of price tag next year.
For sure. Yeah, it'd be interesting. It's got that feeling of like an Amon-Ra, Jalen Waddle kind of feeling, going into that sophomore year, where both played very well, both had stretches. And it's because it feels different, right, than Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, because they were drafted to be that. They were going to be the alphas in their offense again year 2. It's just the dude put up 1,486 yards, So I mean, that's the thought process too. Is if he was drafted as a first-round wide receiver, how are we discussing? So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out next year. Devon Achane, another guy on this list, it's going to be really interesting to see where he goes in drafts next year, because some people I know are going to be taking him very high, because they, you saw the upside with it, and other people are going to be other people are not going to touch him at all in drafts because of this first year. And we got to give our guy Sammy Ballgame a little bit of love here. He's a guy that, you wish you could have made an award category just getting something, right? 86 catches, 120 targets, 889 yards, 10 tutties, 14.1 fantasy points per game. Tight end 1 overall in fantasy points scored, tight end 3 in fantasy points per game, behind only Travis Kelce and TJ Hawkinson. So it's a pretty good breath to be in. This dude, I mean, he's going to be a guy that we're talking about in the first 4 rounds for sure next season. Maybe, creeping up in that Mark Andrews range from this year. Ooh, do we get a blockbuster, Ty? Is that what that face is?
Whoa. Breaking news. The Titans are moving on from Mike Vrabel.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
Did not expect that one.
Oh, that's crazy. Talk about a guy who's going to get a head coaching job like that. He is going to.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
He'll be hired. That's going to be interesting now, because,
everyone's talking New England.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I could see that for sure. And that might, expedite Bill being gone out of New England now, too, of we move on from him. Wow, that's wild.
Man.
Oh, that means Derrick Henry's pretty much said he's gone.
He's gone.
Mean, not that it matters too much. Tannehill said he was gone. D-Hop's probably out as well. So
he'll probably want out.
It's gonna be a full rebuild in Tennessee, like full rebuild in Tennessee this season. So it should be interesting. Maybe Traylon Burks figures it out. Oh,
kind of need him to.
Yeah.
Back to St. Louis Porter though.
Yeah.
The guy, he's going to go in the first 4 rounds. The only, I'll say this too. This was a fun fact that I found. Do you want to guess who the highest rookie tight end was in fantasy football up until Sammy Laporta?
Oh, I don't know. Who was it?
It's Jeremy Shockey in 2002.
That's so
And
gross.
He was the tight end 4 that year.
That's so gross.
Like this was historic for a rookie tight end, and you want him to take another step forward next year. My only worry is one of two things. One, Ben Johnson leaves. Ben Johnson leaves. What does this offense look like? And two, because Jameson Williams hasn't really turned out at all for the first round draft capital that the Lions spent on him, right?
Mm-hmm.
What if they bring in like another stud wide receiver?
Yeah.
That then gets really complicated because then you've got Jahmyr Gibbs, you've got David Montgomery in the backfield still too. Then you've got Amon-Ra and potential stud wide receiver. Then you've got Sam Laporta. That's 5 people, and we have never. Correct me if I'm wrong. I've never seen an offense be able to, handle 5 weapons of that kind of caliber and all return well in fantasy.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting too. Like you talk about Jameson Williams, it's gonna be his first full offseason, right? You put him as the wide receiver 3 where he's just streaking down the field. We could see it. It'd be interesting there, but I also, don't think we can underestimate if Ben Johnson leaves. It could be huge for this offense. We saw that with the Eagles this year, right? Shane Steichen's gone, and it has not been pretty this, especially the second half of the season for the Eagles. So definitely something to watch. We're not saying that it falls apart if Ben Johnson's gone, but there is a potential that it could be a little bit different. All right, we're gonna move on to surprise of the year. We have Rashee Rice, Jordan Love, Nico Collins, and Kyren Williams once again in this category. For surprise of the year, it's hard not to put him in surprise of the year as well. Little drum roll, please.
It's like Christmas Vacation, right? And doing the light show.
Oh, we need a producer. All right. And the winner of biggest prize is Kyren Williams taking home his second award. This has been our closest one so far at 44% for Kyren. Nico Collins up at 34%. Jordan Love at 15%, and Rashee Rice at 7%. Again, Kyren Williams, I think, has to win this just because, we talked about him, just a second ago. 21.3 fantasy points per game after, not being drafted because nobody thought he was even going to be, get meaningful touches on this team. So we won't talk too much about Kyren. Kyren, congratulations on your second award. But let's talk a little bit more on Mr. Nico Collins, because he's a guy we said before the beginning of the year, hey, he could be the sleeper of the year, right?
Mm-hmm.
CJ Stroud plays well. He could be dynamic in this offense. Tight. What are your thoughts on Nico Collins, what he did this season? How does that translate moving forward? Give us a little bit on Nico Collins.
Nico Collins, I worry, could be the most overpriced wide receiver next year.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason why I'll say that is I have to think Houston goes out and gets an elite weapon for CJ Stroud. And that's not, we've seen it in the past with at least quarterbacks, second-year quarterbacks. I think it's the second-year quarterbacks. Teams go out and trade for a stud wide receiver. The first name that comes to mind right away is, for whatever reason, this guy's always in trade conversations. Maybe that's not true for the league, but at least for fans, he is. Devontae Adams. You go get Devontae Adams, TJ Stroud. Oh, brother, right?
Yeah.
Saw Chicago make that. We saw Chicago make the DJ Moore trade, and look how well that worked out for the most part.
Yeah.
AJ Brown, the Eagles, a couple of years ago, right? Like, it's a trend. And worry is if, maybe this is more best ball than it is like actual drafts. Because after the fantasy league draft, we may know a better picture of what this wide receiver room will look like. But man, Nico Collins has been probably your playoff hero, right?
Yeah.
For this year. Really I really hope that they don't trade for him because Nico Collins is so freaking good, but
yeah,
he's one that I'm probably the most concerned for going into next year in terms of just a price point.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, right? Tank Dell getting hurt, after this year, after he was starting to go on a tear, I mean, he was looking unbelievable, broke his leg, unfortunately, but he had 700 receiving yards in 11 games in his rookie season. So, that's nothing to scoff at. Even if they don't bring in somebody, it's just going to be interesting how they go back and forth.
The other thing about Nico that I'm just kind of putting together.
Yeah.
The guy had 3 games this year with at least 34 fantasy points. In all of those weeks, he finished as the wide receiver 3. He never had a wide receiver 1 finish.
Poor guy.
34 or 35 points. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous.
That is crazy.
I don't know if that's more so like hey, look how good wide receivers have been this year in fantasy football, or if it's more so just like the fact that Nico Collins, the guy that was going in the 14th round of your drafts, put up 3 games with at least 34 fantasy points.
Yeah, for sure. And then moving on to Jordan Love. He was a guy that surprised me. I was definitely out on Jordan Love at the beginning of the year. He was a guy
yeah, you were.
I did not believe in at all. I did not think that he would throw more than 25 touchdowns, and he threw 33, I think. He was almost the NFL. Let me pull this up quick. He might have been
32.
He ended up with 32. He's second in the NFL, just behind Dak Prescott. 64% completion percentage, threw for 4,100 yards, ran for another 247, ran another 4 touchdowns, 36 total touchdowns, QB5 on the year. And he did it with, kind of a ragtag group at the beginning of the year. Now, you look at it, Jaden Reed looks like he's pretty good. Dontavian Wicks stepped up in their last game against the Bears. Christian Watson, if he's actually on the field, is good. He's good for the most part, right? I mean, but I still think at the same time, this is another team that could use a weapon, a Devontae Adams, if you will. Just because, right, the wide receivers have played good, the tight ends have played good, but at the same time, they're all, young. They're not yet. I don't think any of them are yet alpha wide receivers. They're not every single game. You can rely on them no matter what.
I don't think their ceiling is that either. I think
I would agree.
The role is very specific. I think Christian Watson is very specific as well. Romeo Doubs now seems like the depth piece, which is, I think, hilarious because everyone was like, it's Romeo Doubs season now in Green Bay. And, but yeah, Green Bay is probably the one team that needs an alpha receiver, but they won't because it's Green Bay.
Yeah. But yeah, it looks like, Jordan Love's going to be the quarterback for at least the next 4 years, probably after they give him an extension here. I would assume they've seen enough bringing this team to the playoffs. So definitely a surprise. And the last guy, Rashee Rice, was on here. I think it's a little bit of a surprise just because a Kansas City wide receiver finally did something. He did something, I should say, for a rookie wide receiver, right? We're not talking about Rashee Rice as, a top, 10 wide receiver, but still almost 1,000 yards, 79 receptions, had another 7 touchdowns. 13.3 fantasy points per game. That's what you like to see moving forward, right? He looks like the guy. Kansas City is definitely another team that, they might go, hey, things weren't so great this year on offense. We can't just rely on Travis Kelce to carry the load. So we might go get another wide receiver, but I don't know how much that actually takes away from Rashee Rice either, right? I think he can still perform, and I think he can still be good with another wide receiver in this offense.
Yeah, we have said maybe on the podcast, maybe just in our own little circle, but Rashee Rice was this year's Amon-Ra St. Brown. It wasn't even close. And in some ways, you kind of hope that he stays on the same trajectory as Amon-Ra St. Brown in the sense that they don't bring in anyone else, and that Patrick Mahomes and Rashee Rice just start this unreal connection that can last for another year's worth of fantasy relevancy. And I mean, the guy was probably the older playoff hero, right?
Yeah.
24, 14, 18, 24, 11, 17. Like, you couldn't have asked for more during playoff time.
Yeah, and it was nice to see the targets that second half of the season, 10-9, 10-9, 12-6. Obviously, you're probably, like I said earlier, if they do bring in another wide receiver like they've been talking, it probably does hurt a little bit. You just have someone taking away targets. But, it might help the offense move the ball more. Patrick Mahomes threw only 25 touchdowns this season after throwing 41 last year. 27 this year after throwing 41 last year. So, more touchdowns go around, stuff like that. I think at the same time, there's going to be a little give and take. I don't think it's the end of the world if they do add another wide receiver to this offense. All righty, with that, we're going to take a quick break here from our friends with Underdog, and then we're going to finish up with Rookie of the Year and the Fantasy MVP.
Today's podcast episode is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, we love Underdog. It is the easiest place to play best ball formats, and they even have their own form of player props called Pick'em. You can make up to 20 times your money on a single night by correlating props together. 2 picks will triple your money, 3 will 6 times it, 4 will 10 times it, and 5 plays that all hit will multiply your entry by 20. You can even place insurance on your picks too, so if only 4 of your 5 props hit, you still get 10 times your entry. And if you use our code FELLAS when signing up, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100.
And we're back with our last 2 awards. Me and Tyler just kind of drummed this up really quick on that break, but we're talking about Mike Vrabel. Tyler, where do you think if you could have him go somewhere, where would you have him go?
I'm tired of talking about this team, but now when it comes to Mike Vrabel needs to go to the Atlanta Falcons ASAP.
And then if they bring in a guy like Justin Fields, imagine that offense. Imagine that offense for fantasy. We might actually get what we want from a fantasy perspective. It'd be beautiful. All right. Just a little hoping on our end.
Right.
Just a little hoping. All right, let's jump into Rookie of the Year. Our 4 nominees: Jahmyr Gibbs, Puka Nacua, Bijan Robinson, and Sam Laporta. I think it's kind of wild that Lucas threw Bijan Robinson in here as one of the options, but he was top 12 running back, so you got to give him that. It's just, and I think it is interesting to see how the people voted him. But our winner of Rookie of the Year, Puka Nacua. Yeah, I don't think anybody was surprised by that. 77. Yeah, 77% of the votes. Sam Laporta, 15% of the votes. Jahmyr Gibbs, 8%. And then Bijan got 1% of the votes. I think he had 4 votes total out of a little bit over 1,600. So really sticking it in there, Bijan, playing well. But yeah, we talked about Puka earlier, right? It was a record-setting year. Laporta, Gibbs both played very well, but you're just not topping Puka's Rookie of the Year. Jahmyr Gibbs finishes the running back 10 on the season, 16.1 points per game, running back 8 in points per game. Sam Laporta, tight end 1, but what Puka did was just incredible. So, hats off. This one wasn't too big of a shock. We talked about Laporta. Let's talk about Jahmyr Gibbs a little bit. I got to say, I'm very happy. I pretty much based my entire offseason on Jahmyr Gibbs, and I was worried at first. Those first couple of weeks, I was like, oh my gosh, they are going to Bijan Robinson this guy and not give him any carries. But then down the stretch, he really took control of his backfield. Dave Montgomery was still there. Dave Montgomery still got carries, but Gibbs was seeing carries. Gibbs saw just under 1,000 rushing yards. Gibbs saw 945 rushing yards on 5.2 yards per carry. He had another 52 receptions on 71 targets through the air for 316 yards and a tutty. So, not much more you can ask for from Jahmyr Gibbs there. Scoring 11 total touchdowns, 1,200 total yards.
No, I mean, he came back from his injury, right? He missed week 5, missed week 6 after what was probably a disappointing start to the season because you took him with pretty high expectations, but he comes back off the injury. Running back 3, running back 1, running back 2, running back 3 in 4 straight weeks. 3 of those games, he had at least 26 fantasy points. And he feels like another Kyron in some ways, but Kyron only did it in fewer times. You rarely lost because of Jahmyr Gibbs. And he might have been a reason why you probably lost your fantasy championship if you played in week 17, because he only put up 5 points that week. But the thing is, I remember I remember this like it was yesterday. I think it was the first time the Vikings were playing the Lions, and Gibbs, because he finished 2 rushing touchdowns, I was like, he scored for the second time, and a message came in Lucas, and I go, what was the point of signing David Montgomery? And they're like, there was no point. It's kind of like the astronaut meme, right?
Yeah.
It never was. But yeah, like Jahmyr Gibbs, sky's the limit for him next year. So as far as I'm concerned, because if he's going to get the amount of touches that he's getting and how efficient he is, why can it not be Jahmyr Gibbs season next year?
Yeah, for sure. And then Bijan Robinson, I was giving a little crap for Bijan, but 1,500 total yards on the season. 50. Yeah.
No way.
1,500 total yards. He only had 8 touchdowns. So that, that's a big kicker. That's why he's down. He still finishes running back 9. He still had 4.6 yards per carry. And so 58 receptions, 86 targets still led the tied with Alvin Kamara for most targets among running backs. Obviously, Kamara only played 13 games, so that's a little bit different. But yeah, more total yards than Derrick Henry, more total yards than Kyron Williams. Obviously, Kyron Williams only played 5 less games, but more total yards than Joe Mixon, more total yards than Raheem Mostert. So it felt disappointing, but obviously it's with the thought that we were hoping that this guy would be running back 3, running back 4 on the season, averaging 18 points per game. People are talking about his rookie Saquon Barkley. That's the way you're hoping. And honestly, that's who he could have been if they would have just given him the freaking ball. Mm-hmm. I mean, thank you, Arthur Smith. You ruined another guy 3 straight years. Hey, Kyle Pitts is good. Let's ruin him. Drake London is good. Let's ruin him. Bijan Robinson is good. Oh, hey, I'm going to ruin him too. And now you're gone. So that's all I got to say about.
Shout out to Arthur Smith because you ruined our fantasy seasons. No, I have to think that Bijan is now going to be the guy in this backfield with whoever this next coach is. Like, yes, Tyler Algier is nice. Sure, give him 7, 8, 9 carries a game. Mm-hmm. Don't give him 14 and give Bijan 11. Don't do that. Yeah. That's malpractice, honestly. Yeah. And I do want to take this time to issue a formal apology to Bijan. Did not recognize that you did put up 1,500.
I know. That's what I was like. What the heck? That's crazy talk.
Yeah. That being said, though, he might actually benefit from a new quarterback because the fact that he put up 86 targets and had 58 receptions, that's nearly 30 incompletions or whatever we want to call it.
Yeah.
The next running back that had that amount of opportunities, I don't know how to phrase that. Nobody, as far as I'm concerned. Like he could have had at least 10 more fantasy points, and then he's probably looking at what, running back 7, 8,
running back 6,
6, like
running back 7,
I think he's getting a little overshadowed by all the Arthur Smith hate. Time to appreciate some Bijan Robinson, and I'm all the way in on Bijan Robinson next year. But the problem is he's probably going to go within top 5 next year. Is he not?
Yeah, I mean, you got to think. I mean, he's for sure top 3 running back.
Right.
It'll just depend on where we value Breece Hall, Travis Etienne, Kyron Williams, guys like that, Jahmyr Gibbs, even. But yeah,
I cannot wait to have that Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson talk next year. Oh, that's going to be phenomenal.
I think so. I mean, they both looked great, and it's crazy. You look at carries. All these players have more carries this season than Bijan Robinson. Christian McCaffrey, Breece Hall, Travis Etienne, Rashad White, Joe Mixon, Kyron Williams in only 12 games, Derrick Henry, James Cook, Saquon Barkley, Tony Pollard, David Montgomery, Kenneth Walker, DeAndre Swift, Najee Harris. Gosh, Najee Harris, running back 23, and he had 255 carries. Chuba Hubbard, Josh Jacobs, Javonte Williams, Devin Singletary had I think more carries. Devin Singletary had more carries than Bijan Robinson this year.
Arthur Smith, you absolute idiot.
Yeah, that's great. That is absolutely wild for a team that wants to establish the run. Alrighty, enough time on the malpractice of Arthur Smith. Let's talk about everybody's favorite award, fantasy MVP. We had Christian McCaffrey, Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, and then we had an other category just in case you wanted to throw someone in there. Either it goes Kyron, Raheem Mostert, whoever. Sam Laporta got a couple votes. And the winner of our fantasy MVP is CMC with a commanding 75% of the votes. CeeDee Lamb came in next at 12%, and Tyreek had 11% just behind him. So, that leaves 2% for others. So there wasn't a ton in the other categories. CMC, I think, some people are like, well, yeah, he's expected to be that good. He was, but yet he scored 100 more fantasy points than the next closest running back. Like, what are you going to argue with? Like, you want to talk about a positional advantage?
Yeah.
He was a positional advantage when there wasn't supposed to be a positional advantage. I mean, this dude, 3 more points per game than the running back 2, 6 more points per game than the running back 3 on the season. I mean, that is incredible. We just talked about Bijan Robinson at 1,500 total yards. Christian McCaffrey averaged 10 more fantasy points per game than Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson this season was closer in points per game to Kevin Harris of the New England Patriots than he was to Christian McCaffrey.
Oh.
Kevin Harris played 4 games, had 16 carries for 65 yards, and he had a touchdown.
Everyone talks about Christian McCaffrey's 2019 season, right? Where the fact that he was like 1,400 rushing yards, over 1,000 yards receiving. He had over 100 receptions, right? Like that was like the fantasy season for all record books.
Mm-hmm.
Christian McCaffrey might have 2 like season finishes in like the top 5 of all time. Like, this season was special. It was something that I think we've been kind of waiting to see from a running back at least since 2019. I'll call it. I mean, we've had some good, running backs here and there. We had JT's year before he got hurt and all that kind of stuff. This season for McCaffrey was otherworldly. And I feel bad for Tyreek and I feel bad for CeeDee Lamb because both were also phenomenal in their own rights.
Mm-hmm.
But just Kyle Shanahan said, yo, you know what? We're going to give Christian McCaffrey the ball 350 times this season, and he's going to be the most efficient runner with those touches.
Yeah. 5.4 yards per carry, 8.4 yards per reception. I mean, he's in the top 1% of each of those categories.
0.1%.
And then you add another 21 touchdowns. It's just, the dude was phenomenal. They leaned on him constantly. People had worries about Elijah Mitchell coming into the year. He's been the guy I've ranked as my running back 1 since we started this. Every single year, I'll rank him as my running back 1 again next year. He's got a guy I'm going to for sure, ride or die on. If he falls off, you know what? I'll take that L. But I'm going to really go. Try to get Christian McCaffrey on my team. But yeah, we talked about CeeDee Lamb. We talked about Tyreek Hill. 23.7 fantasy points per game from CeeDee Lamb, the wide receiver 1 overall in points per game, and 4 and 23.5 points per game from Tyreek Hill. CeeDee Lamb was the only position player in PPR formats to finish with over 400 total points because Christian McCaffrey missed that last game. I do think Christian McCaffrey, if he doesn't get hurt in that last game, week 17, he's probably putting up another 10 points. He's probably increasing that to close to 25 fantasy points per game.
Mm-hmm.
But man, you look at CeeDee Lamb, just wild, 135 receptions. He was closing on that Mike Thomas number.
It was
Cooper Kupp number. Not quite there, but getting close. 181 targets, 1,700 yards, 12 touchdowns, had another 113 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground. Tyreek Hill, 119 receptions, 171 targets, 1,799 yards, and 13 touchdowns. I mean, those 2 guys were unbelievable. And like Christian McCaffrey, they really separated themselves from the pack. I think you could make an argument for any of these three guys to be fantasy MVP. I think the reason it's Christian McCaffrey is just because of the fact the rest of the running backs were not nearly as good as I think the rest of the wide receivers were this season.
You do need to give me a follow on Twitter because on October 21st at 9:19 a.m. on the X, I tweeted out, today is a great day to go trade for CeeDee Lamb at whatever the price. And just so we can put timelines in place and stuff, October 21st, week 7, they were on bye. Immediately after that, no finish lower than 16 fantasy points. Every single finish except for one was top 16 rest of the season. The dude was otherworldly second half of the season. And it's only, if he had done this at the beginning of the season, I think it's much closer in the vote. If Tyreek doesn't get hurt, I think it's much closer of a vote. But because McCaffrey did it for the entire season, that's why he ran away with it. But I just mentioned the CeeDee Lamb. I mentioned Tyreek Hill because they cannot be underappreciated enough as well.
Let me read you weeks 8 to 18 CeeDee Lamb stats. So this is 11 weeks, 101 receptions, 139 targets, 1,200 yards. He had 11 touchdowns, 28.5 fantasy points per game. He was averaging 7 more fantasy points per game than Tyreek Hill, who was the wide receiver 2 in that stretch. That is ridiculous.
Ridiculous. Yeah, Mike McCarthy, you are next on my list of most hated coaches because, we want to run the ball more. And then here you are just feeding CeeDee Lamb like no tomorrow.
Yeah. The next closest, so he had 101 receptions. The next closest player in receptions was Amon-Ra St. Brown with 68. He had 33 more receptions than the next closest guy over that last 11 weeks. That's just insane. And I think CD has earned himself fully to be put in that Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson category, right?
But he's not better than them, but he's in the conversation.
I think he's in that category at least at this point. Tyreek Hill as well, from a redraft perspective, obviously in there too. But man, that wraps up our fantasy awards. We can recap them here real quick for you. Biggest bust, Austin Eckler. Biggest steal, Raheem Mostert. Waiver wire pickup, Kyren Williams. Surprise of the year, Kyren Williams. Rookie of the year, Puka Nacua. And fantasy MVP, Christian McCaffrey. Ty, was there any that surprised you, or were you pretty much with the consensus on this one?
I was pretty much with the consensus, and I think my biggest takeaway really is like the amount of young players that we talked about, rookies, sophomores. We had an overabundance of rookie surges at the end of the year. And that's what makes fantasy football so much fun for us, at least, right? When we get into dynasty content, talking about the NFL draft, we could be talking about the next fantasy superstar, right? Bijan was supposed to be the guy this year. He didn't necessarily live up to that kind of hype, but he was still pretty good, right? Jahmyr Gibbs, right? All these young players have something to offer your fantasy teams. And, but then you've got the old heads, right? You've got, Raheem Mostert, Mike Evans, you've got CMC, CD, Tyreek, right? This was just a very good year for fantasy football in general, I think.
For sure. Yeah. I don't have much else to add. We've, been saying it. Ty's got a video coming on Wednesday. I got one coming on Friday. We got another podcast coming. We're going to have content for you guys for the rest of the season. So make sure you're subscribed on YouTube, turn on those notifications, make sure you're hitting that audio podcast. All of our socials, we're going to have short form content coming out for you guys as well. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sticking with us this season. We hope you won the championship. We hope you had some of these guys on your team, except for Austin Eckler. But yeah, with that, we will see you guys on Thursday. Ty will see you guys tomorrow, but deuces.